I worked the night shift at a remote truck stop. There are rules about the woods. The lot is a pale rectangle of cracked asphalt and sodium lamps, and beyond the last row of trucks, the trees press tight like a dark necklace. On quiet nights, the pines make a sound that isn't wind, an old creak, a scraping whisper where branches fold against each other. You can see that line of trees from the register window, and if you've ever had to make a decision between locking up early and answering for it with your life, you learn to watch that line the way other people watch their kids' bedrooms. I parked under a flickering light. My headlights found a blue sedan crooked in the space nearest the tree line, angled as if someone had pulled in fast and then stopped to listen. The engine was off. New guy. He had the look of someone who'd been told he'd landed a job that paid better than a deli counter, but not been told why. He hopped out, shoved his hands in a jacket, and tried to act casual. His name was Mark Carter. He was 26, said he was passing through, said he could start right away and that he didn't scare easy. He had a scar on his lip like he'd been in fights he didn't want to talk about. Kids like him cost us few headaches. Trouble was usually quieter than that. I have 2 kids. Emma is 10 and precise. She likes to map things out and keep lists of what she plans to do on summer days. Jacob is 6 and believes in monsters and superheroes with equal faith, sometimes both at once. I started working nights because the pay is better and the day shift schools are cheaper, and because when the house is quiet at midnight, I can fold laundry and sit with my hands in the hum of the machine and think of nothing more dangerous than mismatched socks. Nights at the truck stop were supposed to be just that. Safe money, steady hours, coffee that tastes like an apology. But there are rules here that nobody prints on the hiring sheet. The rules are on a laminated card folded into my apron. The rules are what keep the night quiet enough for kids to sleep. The first time I tried to explain the rules to Mark, it was like trying to teach someone to swim by pushing them into cold water and saying, "Don't panic." People who grow up in cities think of rules as inconvenient. People who grow up watching the tree line know them as obligations. We stood behind the counter, and I wrote them down on a receipt because he insisted he didn't trust stories. My ink fingers shook a little. I still get nervous handing out the list the first time. I said them like I say prayers, low and every day. Rule 1. Never work alone. Period. If your partner leaves you, you leave with them. If no one can come, lock up and go home. Do not stay to finish the shift. Rule 2. Lock at 11. Not 10:58, not 11:02, 11. You slide the deadbolt and you check the glass. Count the salt jars and the chips and the coffee cans. The count resets the night.
The lock is both promise and seal. Rule 3. If something scratches the bathroom door, you don't open it. You don't peer through the crack. You do not, under any circumstances, try to be the hero who proved there was nothing there. Rule 4. If a customer comes in with anything wrong, if their eyes are too still, if their head lolls wrong, if there's dirt where flesh should be clean, you ask for ID and you call someone. You do not argue, you do not try to fix them, you do not make them laugh, you ask them to leave. Rule 5. If the lights blink, if the hum of the fridges stops, if the radio warbles in a voice that isn't human, you do not look into the lot for the source. You turn off the main, you light a lamp inside, you do a roll call, and you wait. Rule 6. The devices we use, lanterns, the little humming boxes that Thomas keeps in the back, are to be treated like safety equipment. They have no power outside the rules. They are not talismans for bragging. You don't ask what they do. You use them when the rule says to use them. That last one gets people in trouble because curiosity is a human thing. Curiosity asks why the rules are in place. The rules are not explanations. They are containment. Sounds like superstition, Mark said, tossing the receipt aside so the fluorescent light made the ink ghost on the counter. He tossed a hand and the glove smeared the counter's polish. I told him the story about Joseph, who worked the lot 2 summers back. Joseph was a good worker until he wasn't. He thought the rules were stories to scare rookies. One night, Joseph thought he'd prove how safe he was by forgetting the 11 lock. He gave himself a sandwich and a smoke and told himself 3 minutes wouldn't matter. Outside, the woods leaned inward like a dark mouth. The parking lot had a sound like someone turning pages, like paper rubbing paper. Joseph's sandwich fell off the table and landed inexplicably with the wax paper clean under it. The clock blinked. He went to close the back door and the handle froze in his hand. He didn't get it shut.
The security footage caught the edge of the frame where the trees seemed to stare in, and a blur like heat over asphalt, curling up where the second set of loading bay lights cast a strip. Joseph's radio went dead. At 11:03, there was a sound like 1,000 small hands turking sheets. At 11:05, Joseph was gone. His shift ended at 11. I tell the stories and watch the new hire ceases. The parts where people's eyes go dull, where their heads twist the wrong way, get swallowed down like stones. Mark laughed. He laughed when I told Joseph's story like someone laughing at a movie jump scare. He said that people like Joseph had accidents. He said that if there were real danger, somebody like Corbett would care more and pay hazard pay. That was the wrong thing to say.
We don't get hazard pay because the things that come from the woods don't come with job classifications. After the rules, I asked him the simple question I ask every new hire because I want to know if I'm training someone who will follow them when it matters. Would you obey a rule you didn't understand if it might save your life? He froze at the counter and blinked slow. Outside, a pine branch knocked the gutter in a rhythm that sounded like fingers. Yeah, he said finally. I guess. Good, I said, because people who don't obey the rules tend to... I didn't finish. You can see jump cuts in your head of footage that won't run in court. You can imagine the shapes. It's better to leave it unsaid until it has to be said aloud. If this is your kind of story, if you like to speculate about whether you'd follow instruction into danger, tell me below. Would you obey rules you didn't understand? He grinned like he had already decided the right answers to my test. We did orientation in the fluorescent light and the smell of old coffee. I showed him the cameras. The store had 4, and an extra odd upward face that caught a sliver of the ceiling by the women's bathroom. That camera never offered anything pleasant. You'd get at best a half-second smear, and then the angle would shift to a blank tile. Sometimes the time code would go to static for a minute and come back with a frame of nothing but the tree line. Sometimes the footage where someone should be turned to wavering light. I'm not a cop. I don't like interrogation. I like teaching people the smallest things that keep them alive. He asked about the hooded man. William, he said, like a question. I'd seen him before. You see him when the night gets long and you're standing at the register cleaning the same counter for the 3rd time and your back starts to ache and a truck idles like a beast at the edge of hearing. He waits by the pumps, tall and wrapped in a coat too heavy for summer. When he tips his head, the shadows fall across his face and they won't tell you much. He moves like a person who doesn't need to check the lock because the lock feels his hand where it should be. He hands out coffee sometimes. He buys a small thing and makes a tall man silver in the mouth joke and then disappears back into the trees. People who see William swear they feel safer. People who talk to William in daylight say he matches 100 different men. William is not charity. He's a presence. Is he part of the rules? Mark asked, trying for humor. Part of the job, I said. We don't invite him in. You don't press that question in front of new hires. William is an ally if he wants to be. He doesn't take payroll. The first week you do 100 little checks. You write down the freight numbers, you count cigarettes, you check the outside lights. You count because counting can reset something in the room that gets anxious. The count is a rhythm. It is the store's heartbeat.
The crackle of the freezer is the room's breath. When the beat skips, you notice. On my second night with Mark, the faint things started. At 12:12 a.m., the restroom light hummed out like someone had pinched it. The camera in the ceiling over the entry gave us 3 frames of flicker, and then it went soft. Mark sauntered over to the door because he wanted to prove something. You don't, I started, meaning the rule about bathroom noises. He laughed. It's probably a raccoon. You city girls are. If a raccoon makes the water pipes go silent, you should know it. Mark's hand was on the knob when the scratching started. It came from inside the toilet stall, as if nails were being dragged along the seam where tile meets tile. It wasn't the scratching a raccoon makes. It was a patient, almost human cadence, like someone counting slowly with fingertips. The fluorescent tubes over the sink hissed, and a shower of pale dust fell from the ceiling by the soap dispenser. Mark's smile shrank. He twisted to look at me with the martyred expression of someone who had to be daring to get respect. See? Nothing, he said, and then the bathroom door clicked shut. You can't unhear the second it changes. The sound shifted from scratching to a wet, thin suction, like something trying to suck sound out of the room. The camera in the corner died. The display on the monitor went to gray. Mark's hand, still a kid's hand in a glove, moved toward the camera that would look up and then down and get a fixed angle of the cracked door. He leaned his face forward like someone about to win a dare. His breath fogged the monitor slightly. I stood and told him again to step back. My voice was small. The razor behind the register was smaller. The door opened on its own at 12:14. No one was in the stall. The tile was dry. The paper towel dispenser was half dispensed like a slow, deliberate exhale. When I saw the floor by the toilet, I smelled copper, like pennies warmed on a radiator, but there was no blood to see, just a dark smear that ended abruptly, like someone had put a thumb in it and wiped it away with a napkin. The restroom smelled of pine and something older, fermented like leaves in the bottom of a basin. Mark went white and started coughing, as if the smell had stabbed at his throat. "Don't touch anything," I said. "Close the door, run a count, walk it off." He did not close the door. He put his hand on the handle and then, just for a second, looked toward the tree line through the glass in the front door. There was a truck outside, and past that the trees were a blackness with a blue light that seemed to move inside it like a breathing thing. He squinted. "That is," he said. "What is that?" You can tell when someone is starting to believe. The joke goes out of their voice and fear walks in. "Nothing good," I told him. "Shut the bathroom. Get a light." He hesitated. "We should call someone," he said.
"If it's after 11, I said, "you've already called them," meaning the rule about not staying past. But we were still far from 11, and he was emboldened by his youth. He wanted to hear the night exhale like a secret, and he wanted the proof that the rules were made by people who were afraid of nothing. Later that night, after we cleaned the floor and reset the paper towel roll, I found a hair on the sink that wasn't Mark's or mine. It was wiry and matted, a color that sat between a cold bruise and the color of old bone. I put it in a napkin and slid it into the register for John's lap, John being someone who runs an animal clinic in the next town. He sent a text the next day. "Looks human, but odd. Burn the napkin." I didn't. I put the napkin in a drawer instead, and I taped a copy of the rule card to the inside of my apron so I could feel it against my thigh. Mark kept laughing at it for a little while longer. He made jokes about us being a coven. He drank the coffee William bought him and flicked the lid off and said, "This guy's a legit weirdo." William stood by the pumps for half an hour like an argument you don't want to make. He never came in. He never missed a night his presence mattered. He watched the trees the way some people watch a child trying something dangerous for the first time. When I tossed him an extra paper cup from across the lot, he tipped his head and mouthed something that might have been thanks. I couldn't tell. The wind was a voice that would not let words sit still. The second week, the regular, who people called Karen, came in at 2:07 a.m. Karen is the kind of regular you know is trouble because she always has more to tell you than you need to know. People like her are usually harmless, too talkative for their own good. But Karen's head was turned at an angle no neck can turn. She shuffled at the window, and the way she breathed made the room go cold. The smell of her when she pushed the door was like the underside of a mushroom. Mark made jokes. "She had a bad pillow," he said, and then she walked to the coffee and did not look up. "Get her out," I said. "Ask if she needs help. Give her water. Do not touch her. Just talk like you're talking to someone who has lost her keys and can't find them." He smiled like he was acting in a play. "Miss, are you all right?" he said, with a cheeriness that belonged to a salesman. Karen turned her head, and the angle of it clicked like a hinge. She smiled, and it wasn't a smile. Her eyes were not eyes. They were moving dull tops of nail polish over glass. When she spoke, her voice sounded like distant thunder. "They are waiting in the trees," she said. And for my part of the smile, I had to keep doing my register math to remember how to be polite. "Miss," Mark said again, "because that's what you do when you have the safety of the rules as a prop. You should come back during the day." "Do not lock the doors at 11 tonight," she hissed.
If you lock them, you'll find the little ones stuck in the jar. They're pretty in the dark. There were sentences you don't expect a human mouth to make, and a truck stop is an intimate place. People share things over coffee sometimes that they will regret. Mark laughed like it was a joke and asked her if she meant jar literally. He smiled and grabbed a muffin. He shoved it toward her to change the subject. "She should leave," I said quietly. "Go ahead and give her a cup. Ask her to wait outside in the light." Mark did it. He told her she couldn't stand inside like she was a misplaced customer, and apologized when she took offense. Her head cocked and a winter of leaves rattled through the tree line. She pressed against the glass and looked directly at the camera, and for a half-second I saw everything in her face become the exact color of tree bark. "Don't look for what you don't need," she told him. Then she was gone. Not out the door exactly. Gone. The wind took her like she had been a paper napkin torn and folded back into the day. After Karen left, Mark went quiet. That night he got sloppy with the count.
He left a pack of smokes on the display shelf, and the inventory was off by one when he swore it was right. He swore he wasn't tired. He stared once, just once, at the tree line until his eyes watered. He told me he could feel something watching him, like the lot wasn't a neutral place but a wrong turning in a commute. He said he'd be fine. My daughter would call some nights at 2 in the morning when she couldn't fall asleep. "Mom," she said the first week I started training Mark, "do they have monsters in the woods out there?" You learn to be honest in the way that doesn't terrify a child. "There are things that shouldn't be there," I told her, "but there are rules that keep them from coming in. I do my best." "Will you be home?" she asked. "Tomorrow," I lied. I said it the way you smooth a cutties in a shirt you plan to iron later. I thought of Emma and Jacob and the small, stubborn rules you teach your kids. Don't run with scissors, look both ways, don't talk to strangers. Those rules are for small things. The rules at the truck stop are the grown-up versions. They have teeth you don't see. People fall into two camps, those who take the rules like writ and those who test the edges until the edges stop holding. Mark was the sort to test. He wanted proof. He wanted, it seemed, to chisel at the world until it admitted to being made of ordinary things. On a clear, cold night, we were short a worker. Joseph had been gone for weeks, and the town had asked to put a notice in the paper, but the notice came and went like a leaf.
Thomas, our manager, the guy in his 40s who had the old clipboard and the thicker gray hair at his temples, called me to his office at 10:45 to remind me of procedure, who to call if you needed a replacement, where the extra keys were hidden, always in the same place, always a bad idea, and not to engage the men at the edge of the lot. He didn't say much about the woods. Thomas's silence is a thing we respect. "You keep him close," Thomas told me about Mark. "He's brash, but he could last if he listens. Show him the cameras, the counts. It's all in the discipline, Sam." "All right," I said. "I'll do that. He needs to know what 11 a.m. means." Thomas tapped a piece of paper and slid it toward me. It had a list, but not the kind of list you use to order supplies. It looked like someone had tried to draw the store as seen from the sky and then given up. There were arrows and scratched-out notes. He told me, "Don't let him read this whole thing. He isn't ready." I left his office with Mark, and we went back to the register with 3 minutes until 11. The fluorescent clock picked at the second hands. The lot was quiet. The trucks were lined like sleeping animals. Overhead, the pines rustled. At 10:58, I did the first check. All the coolers hummed, the lights in the bathrooms worked, the coffee machine was set on bold. I told Mark the lock story again, because I mean to hammer the rhythm of it into him. He says he'll do it. He says he understands time and duty and how a deadbolt is a small thing for survival. At 11, the lock is supposed to clamp. The story you always get to in nights like this is the little disagreements that decided a man's fate. Why did Joseph not lock at 11? Why did he stay to make a sandwich? Why did Mark think he could prove something by opening the bathroom door? People are human. We make choices, and the world accepts or rejects them. That night, the lot was close to empty. A rig idled in the far corner with the driver asleep. The trees were a black ribbon, and their outline cut the sky. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called, and it sounded like a laugh. Mark fumbled with the keys for longer than I'd like. He dragged his boots and told a joke about his ex who ran a flea market. He timed the joke wrong. At 11:03, the parking lot lights dipped. The rules are supposed to be met halfway. You observe the lock at the right time, and the lock does something to the night. Nothing like barrier, more like the house remembering how to be itself. When the lock clicks and you count the inventory twice and you shut the register drawer and you run the lights, the store is saying a thing back to whatever comes out of the trees. Not tonight. At 11:03, the outside lights faltered and went out in a small bloom. The rig's headlights came on and washed the glass with a thin stream. In the monitor, the tree line pulsed. Mark's hands were still on the keys. He said relax, like he wanted me to be the one who felt silly. Something hit the front door with a soft, wet thud. It wasn't ringing the doorbell. It was a pressure like a palm asleep against glass. The sound left dust working at the inside edge of the frame, as if hands had been dragged along the pane. In the camera that faces the lot, the outline of a figure pressed and left no shadow. The rig's light slid across where it should have been. A damp smear trailed down like someone had breathed out a heavy night. Mark looked at the glass, and then he looked at me. He did not reach for the deadbolt. "That's not—" he started. 3 minutes late was more than 3 minutes. I have said it enough that my voice has the same edge as the analytical part of the night. It's no longer fear, only instrument. "Get the lock," I said. "Now."
He moved, but he wasn't steady. The keys dropped. One of them clanged and slid under the counter. He cursed and bent to get it. The silhouette outside widened, as if someone had flattened their ribcage against the glass in an attempt to be wider than a man. The sound it made against the pane was like something breathing with wet lungs. I went for the deadbolt because there are things you do without thinking when the rules are flaring in your hands. My fingers found cold metal. I threw the bolt, and the world tightened. For a second, everything else held. My breath, Mark's, the truck's engine. The hum of the fridges came back like someone turning a dial. The thing at the glass tapped twice again, like a knuckle, and retreated. For the space of a second, I thought it had left. The trucker in the corner didn't stir. The tree line smoothed itself back into a black shape. Mark was panting as if he'd run. He stared at the glass and then at the clock. It read 11:05. "You were late," I said. Not angrily, I was pointing out a technicality. The rules are a form of attention. They reward the hands that obey. He rubbed his face, and we turned to start the usual. Lights on, lamps lit, devices checked. He tried to make a joke about adrenaline. He asked me again about William, and I told him to stop. But in the corner of the lot, I saw a tall form moving by the trees, and for a moment his hood was backlit, and the coat seemed to drink the light. He stood at the edge like a sentinel, and then he was gone. When I close my eyes now, I remember the way Mark's shoulders fell after that night. The work had scared him like a child falling off a bike. He started putting more careful hands on the rules for a few nights. He'd ring up an awkward customer and ask permission to go outside and check a taillight. He'd count the inventory twice and then 3 times. He learned the cadence of the place. The rules, when you repeat them, become a script you can fall back on without thinking. But habits have their limits. You can practice 1,000 times, and it only takes one lapse to change everything. People survive by pattern until something decides patterns are jokes. That is the slow part of it, the erosion.
The nights kept their breath. There were small tests, shifts of the cameras, the occasional figure at the edge of the lot that would vanish before the rig light crossed it, a call on the radio that sounded like a sentence swallowed halfway through. There were small victories, the deadbolt keeping the store for another dawn, William's silhouette standing like a promise. There were small losses, Joseph's absence like a missing tooth. At home, I tried to keep the normal conversations, homework, soccer practices, dentist appointments. Emma would come home from school and study the sky from our back porch and say, "Do you think they can get in through the laundry room window?" And I'd laugh to disguise the tightening in my stomach and tell her no, that rules keep them at bay. On a Tuesday, there was a man in an orange safety vest who rolled in at 1:30 a.m. and asked for directions. He had the kind of voice that didn't match his face. He told stories about a detour and said he'd been driving all night. Mark rang him up and asked the questions on the script. I watched the man's hands, stubby knuckles, twitch like the fingers were remembering something else. When he turned his head, the skin of his neck looked oddly quilted. Mark's face went slack. He called out to me to check the gas pump, and by the time I turned back, the man was gone. There was no sign he had ever been in the lot. The camera showed nothing but the cold space where the asphalt had been flattened by tires. That is the harder thing to explain, how something can hollow the frame of a place and leave you with a memory of a body that never shows up on film. It is also why Thomas keeps a folder in his office that no one is meant to read until they are ready. The folder contains records nobody will put in a public archive. It has notes that say simply, "Don't test things," and diagrams that look like maps but read like prayers. It has lists, the kind of lists you make when you're trying to keep a wobbling house standing. When Mark first laughed at the rules, he didn't know he was betting more than a little pride. And when he began to take them seriously, it felt like he'd been wearing the rules wrong and had only just found the right sleeve. I was starting to believe he might make it. The lot settled into that odd rhythm where the heartbeats are smaller and you think you can breathe again. And then there are nights like the one that ended with the deadbolt clenching and the trucker crawling from his cab with his head wrapped in a coat, saying he heard someone call his name in the trees. Nights when the rulebook wasn't enough. Late that month, on the night the moon was shy and the pines murmured like a congregation, Mark made an idiotic decision. He stayed in the bathroom just a little too long because he wanted to see the camera footage afterward and prove to himself that he'd been brave. He told me he wanted to double-check something, and in his voice I heard the last of the scoffing. A rule is a thing you can rely on like a rail. Breaking one is like stepping off the platform when a train is coming late. It might be nothing. It might be everything. I told him sternly not to be late that night. We lock at 11, I said. We close the door. We watch the monitors. You leave if you can't make it. He said he understood. The clock ticked. The trees leaned. The truck stop held its breath. At 11, the screen flared and then went quiet. The doors clicked. The glass glazed like water. The lot was a bowl, and the bowl held silhouettes. A sound came from the ceiling above the supply closet like someone pushing up from underneath. It was a small sound at first. It could have been a loose sheet metal. Then the fluorescent near the coolers spit and went out. The humming in the fridge jagged like a cough. Mark went for the breaker because he didn't remember my name anymore. He only remembered that something had to be an explanation. I remember the way the bulbs blew in a pattern like counting. On camera, the upward angle from the back hall showed a darkness pooling under the door to the bathroom. On the monitor, a smudge leaned into the supply closet, and the top of the genset hummed the box that was now an instrument. I can still see the frame where Mark's face is in the glow of a flashlight, and the way his eyes have suddenly learned the horizon of terror. He said my name, and his voice was something I'd heard only once before, the kind of tone a man uses when calling his mother's name in a dream. "Sam," he said. "Sam." Before he could finish, the light in the hallway flicked to white, and a gust of wind, impossible for a sealed building, rushed along the tile. Something moved in the supply closet, and the sound was like 100 nails dragged across the metal shelves. The door thudded twice, and then the sound multiplied into a chorus of hands. I grabbed the lamp near the register and the humming box that Thomas keeps in the back. He calls it a tool, but I don't understand tool. I know to hold it up in front of me like a shield when the rules say to. The lamp's halo turned the rows of snacks into little islands. The humming box buzzed a way that tightened my jaw. Mark was at my side, and for a second we were ordinary people doing ordinary things. I thought then, and I think now, of Emma and Jacob asleep in our small house, their breaths even and unknowing. I thought about how quickly someone can move from careless to bereft. I thought of William's silent figure at the tree line and the way his coat drank light. I thought of the list tucked into my apron at home with the scrawled numbers of grocery items and the illicit smell of a child's candy. The supply closet door tore open, and something hit the wrong side of our world. It did not come in clever shapes that fit a human head. It came in folds, in pressure, in the wrong palette of sound. I saw, for an instant, a face, if I can call it a face, that had no proper mouth, only a spread of wet texture that took the light like it was eating it. I do not describe anatomy, because there is no need to make it into a diagram. I will say only that whatever it was moved like a thing that had never learned to speak except at the edge of other people's senses. We did what the rules told us. We lit, we counted, we moved. We do not invent bravery. We perform it because there is an algorithm to survival here. Discipline, repetition, attention. Mark and I backed toward the register, the world rearranged by the lamplight, the hum of the store like a throbbing thing. The window shuddered with friction as something tested the glass. For a minute, I believed that if you held your breath hard enough, the night would forget you existed. Then a hand, no, not a hand, but something that acted like one, slapped at the pane nearest the restrooms with the sound of wet leather. The glass did not break, but it sang. Mark screamed, and the scream was a sound that I will never forget. Half fear and half the realization that for him, the rules had been an abstract until the moment they weren't. The light from outside cut across the tiled floor and found the pattern on Mark's boot. The boot left a dark smear on the tile like someone answering a question with a mark. He fell to his knees because his legs had given out, and in that moment of being human on the floor, he reached for me and for the rules at the same time. "Do something," he begged. What I did was follow a pattern I'd learned in the long apprenticeship of the night. Keep the light between you and the window. Don't turn your back. Don't let him step beyond the threshold. We recited the count, quietly, in order. 11. The latch. Check the stock. The list will save you more often than a prayer. Something in the ceiling shrugged, and we could hear the attic space crawl. The chant of the fridges got lumpy, like someone pressed their thumb on the throat of the store. The humbox in my hand felt hot. William. Where was William? The trees were a fold of black, and when I looked out there was a shape standing taller than the rest of the trunks, cloaked. He raised something that could have been a hand, or could have been a signal. I had no time to know. Mark was shaking now, and his eyes were too wide.
For a second I thought he'd be one of those people who couldn't take the night and would leave us with the choices marked in blood and regret. His hands were bleeding. There were no wounds I could see, but blood smeared the knuckles like someone who'd been pressing against glass for too long. We did not let the thing in. We couldn't. We didn't know how to make the being into anything but a thing with an appetite for crossing thresholds. We did the things in the order we knew them, and the night pushed back.
When the lights came back, soft and stupid as a blink, we were both on our feet with our hands on the register and the lamp between us like a small sun. The supply closet lay silent, and the smell of pine rushed under the door like a bad joke. Mark's breath came in rattles. On the monitor, the back camera showed only a smear that might have once been a thing, but the edges of the frame were clean. He looked at me then, with a kind of pleading I had seen only when my children fell off their bikes and looked up and wanted a mother to say it was okay. "Sam," he said, "what was that?" "You know what it was," I said. "You could have listened." He swallowed and said, "I'm sorry." Apologies are thin things in an empty room. They can be honest and inadequate at once. I shouldn't have been satisfied with apologies. I was. We stood in the hum, and the lamp warmed our faces, and the tree line beyond the lot was only tree line again, but the world was not the same. Something had tried to cross the pane and failed. We had been the wall. It was not yet a disaster. It was a scare, the kind you buy time with. But the lot remembers when you are sloppy. The trees remember when a bolt is late. There are hours when the night is patient and precise. It waits until you start to believe again, and then it remembers you like a ledger. It keeps a slow account of late bolts and lazy counts, and hands that tremble when they should be steady. We paid the price for a slack minute. Mark didn't come in the next night. He didn't show up for a shift, and at first I thought he'd slept through it, or decided road life suited him better. He'd always been fickle, brash, then contrite. At 1:12 a.m. I scrolled back through the cameras, because when there's a hole in the pattern, the cameras show you where the shape fell out. The monitor stuttered on the angle above the bathroom, and then dropped to a strip of raw static, and when it came back, there was one frame that lasted less than a breath, a smear that might have been a hand, or might have been night settling like a cloth. The time code blinked 1:13, and the next clip had a smear of something that turned the tile a dull, wrong color. The remainder of the hour the feeds hiccuped, and then played as if nothing had happened, a boring reel of coffee steam and a truck idling. I called Mark's phone. It rang and went to voicemail. The rig driver in the far lot swore he'd seen Mark taking out the trash around midnight, cigarette in hand, head bent like he was listening for something only he could hear. The driver said he'd waved, and Mark had looked right through him, as if the man had been a reflection. When I said Mark didn't come in, the driver's face softened like a hand over a candle. "You sure?" he asked. By morning, there was a squad car under the sodium light, and Detective Ryan Bennett on the register side, asking the same questions a dozen ways, until a person has used up all their stories.
He had the careful face of someone trained to look for ordinary explanations, and the patience to keep looking when they didn't hold. He watched the security footage with me and rewound it until the tape glitched. "There's a gap," he said, not accusing, just noting. "There's always a gap," I told him. I had learned that what looked like evidence to policemen looked like rumor to the night. The cameras are temperamental. The tree line eats frames. He didn't look satisfied. "When was the last time you saw him?" "That night," I said. "He left, he was there at 11. After that," my voice felt thin. I told him about the bathroom, about the smear on the tile, about the way something had pressed its face to the glass at 11:05. I didn't tell him about Joseph. I didn't tell him about William. He didn't ask. By noon that day, there were men in uniforms with tape and gloves and a somber way of making small talk. Someone searched the back lot with flashlights. They found one of Mark's sneakers near the edge of the trees, tangled in bramble as if someone had left it in a hurry and then been pulled away. They found his lighter snapped in half. And then, 2 days later, they found him. He was on a logging road that runs out past town, the kind of place people pull over for a smoke away from the highway. He was face down like he'd fallen asleep, except he didn't breathe. There were no obvious wounds that made sense, nothing surgical, nothing dramatic to fit the news reports easier, but his neck was at a wrong angle, and his hand had been stripped of skin along one side, as if he'd been grabbed by something that didn't have thumbs. There were twig marks across his jacket, where the trees had maybe brushed him, or where he'd stood too close to a limb. A smear of something dark was on the cuff of his sleeve, and a few pine needles were stuck in it. They took him away in a blanket and closed the road for a while, and the detective asked me to come down to the station to talk. It's a weird thing to go through an interview and feel less like a witness and more like a silenced chorus. Bennett was professional. He took my statements, asked about enemies, asked about debts and lovers, and when he asked about the rules, I told him everything I could without sounding like a lunatic. He understood the cameras. He did not understand the repository of bad nights that Thomas kept. I need to ask you, was there anything at all different the night he disappeared? Bennett asked. He had a notepad with careful lines. His pen made tick marks. I told him about the lights and the door and the smell in the bathroom. I told him about the keys at 11:03 and the kid's hands on the glass. He nodded and wrote the time down. People go missing in wooded areas all the time, he said. We have a responsibility to exhaust the normal explanations first. Then do that, I said, but don't hand me that like it absolves the rest. He didn't smile.
He did, though, say something that mattered. If anyone pushes you to change what happened, tell me. If someone tells you they're going to handle it differently, call me. Thomas came down to the station later wearing a coat 2 sizes too big and with a folder under his arm. He stood at the edge of the interview room and looked like a man carrying his backboard. We need to meet, he said to me after Bennett left. In private, he took me to the office and closed the door like he was closing the last good thing in the room. He didn't divide himself into speeches. He gave me a slim packet that had a few yellowing pages and a photograph of a map. I know what you've seen, he said. You know what we do. I wanted you to see this now. He opened the folder only enough to let me glance. There were notations with dates, months and years where a number of nights had ascended, plus clipped newspaper articles that had been folded so many times the print had softened. A picture of a man in a hood, one of William's angles, was photocopied straight out of the camera that sits by pump 3. The caption under that picture was a scribble. You've hidden this from the kid, right? I asked, and he nodded. I hide it because they can't carry it until they're willing, he said. Rules are for people on the line. They are not explanations. The folder is not for everyone. It's for people who will inherit the job's memory. Is there anything in here about... I couldn't bring myself to say crossing the boundary. He didn't need me to. Thin spot, he said. It's an intersection of pressure. Things come easier where the line grows porous. We hold a set of discipline around it. The rules are mapped to that discipline. People who keep the rhythm can keep it from widening. People who try to understand it on their own get consumed by curiosity. How? I asked. How does something like that... I stopped. Thomas's look told me he had answers I didn't want, and that knowing them would change me. It doesn't matter how, he said. What matters, what always matters, is that someone keeps the rules and doesn't go poking at what is tucked behind the trees. We do our job. We pay attention. William helps when he wants to. He is not a bargain. He is an arrangement. He shows because it's in his nature to show. Don't anthropomorphize him. He slammed the folder shut like you'd close a wound. We have a problem, he said. We had a man who didn't believe. Guilt lived in my stomach in the way guilt does, heavy and persistent. I kept replaying the frames of Mark looking at the trees and thinking maybe I'd slapped a patch over a storm. There are ways to be pragmatic about guilt. You follow the steps you know, and you do not let the feeling make your actions idiotic. I went home and watched my children sleep and felt like a stranger stationed beyond a border. I told them I'd be extra careful. I told my daughter Emma I'd be home early next shift.
She smiled and said, "Okay, Mom," the way kids do when they archive fear into a box labeled "Not Now." Ashley arrived 2 weeks after Mark died. She was quieter than Mark, younger, with a voice that had none of his swagger. She'd been hired after a night of too many call-outs, and the town's supply of reliable people had thinned. She had a backpack with stickers and a sorrowful way of holding a thermos, like it might fall through her hands. When I handed her the laminated rules, she took them with both hands and read them as if they were the national pledge. "I'm not like him," she said. "I grew up near woods. My dad would tell me things to keep away. He taught me to never answer a call that came through leaves." "That's good," I said. "You can be practical and you can be careful. They're the same thing here." Training Ashley felt different than training Mark. With Mark, it had been like teaching someone who believed himself invulnerable. With Ashley, it felt like giving someone a manual for a job they understood at the cellular level. She learned the lock ritual with a precision that made me breathe easier. She learned the paths to the lamplight and the way to position the humbox so it read as a barrier without becoming an idol. She repeated the rules until they were part of her breath. "You sure you don't want me to show you the folder?" Thomas asked one night when he peeked into the break room. He'd been more present since Mark's death, moving like a man nervous about which nail would bop free. No, I told him, not yet. That was true. There are things a person takes on like armor only if they can afford the weight. Ashley didn't need the folder. She needed the work. She asked about William with the same bluntness Christ's children ask about saints. Is he a help or a hazard? She asked. Both, I said. He is a borderman. He does what he does. Be polite, but don't presume. Practice kept us honest. For a week, the nights were ordinary in the way that felt uneasy. A customer with a tailcoat who smelled of road oil. A radio that hiccuped to say nothing. We fell into the pattern the way a chorus finds a harmony. Count, lock, lamp, check. Ashley proved dependable. Steady hands on the register, careful steps when she swept the dust from the mats. She asked small questions with eyes that read for details. She was the kind of person you would want on a night that goes wrong. And then the tests began again, like bad seasons. The power pulsed at 2:47 a.m. on a wet Wednesday, and the parking lot lights went out in a ring as if someone had taken a pair of scissors to the darkness. The radio offered half phrases that were not quite words. The hum box in the back stuttered like a throat clearing. Something banged on the roof above the cooler like heavy boots, and we all stopped sweeping to listen. The tree line seemed closer. The pines were a breathing wall that silently flexed. Ashley didn't flinch.
She walked to the supply closet and took a flashlight from the rack. She did the counts like someone reciting a poem. Rule 2, she said softly in the quiet. Lock at 11. The banging changed. It multiplied, moving as if someone inside the walls were testing doors in sequence. The women's bathroom door clicked and then jarred with an insistence that drove all the blood to my throat. We stood together in the register light, a line of warmth between the dark and the shelves. Don't look, I told Ashley, because the rule had teeth and we had to obey it. Don't go into the bathroom. She didn't. She raised the light and recited the inventory. We did the roll call and checked the boxes. We let the devices hum. The sound at the roof stopped as if an unseen man had been told he'd done well and left the building. When it was over, we were shaking, not because we'd been touched, but because the rules had been tested and had held. Thomas began to bring in more equipment after that. Padded boots, extra lamps, a thicker hum box that he wouldn't let us open entirely. He treated it like sending a scout into unknown territory. You can't rely on goodwill, he said. You need to have a method. What if the method fails? Ashley asked. It has cracks, Thomas admitted. We plug them. That's the work. The work is mostly endurance. It is the patience of repeating a knot until your fingers forget the doubt that first made it. It is counting the chips and counting the clocks and letting the small rituals keep the boundary smooth. But the Woods never satisfied themselves with compliance. They kept testing, not because they are cruel, but because they are hungry for a pattern that will loosen. There were nights when William's presence grew more visible. He would stand at pump 3 and watch the lot like a widow watches a child crossing gravel. One night in January, he stepped up to the door, and for a second his hands were visible on the glass from the inside camera. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. He moved like shadow in a coat, and then, as if he'd remembered something, he peeled away into the trees and left our lot with its salt-scratched asphalt. He's more aggressive lately, Thomas said one night. Or the things are. I can't tell which is worse. You mean he's pushing? I asked. He does what he will, Thomas said. We can only make sure that our side of the line is not inviting. We tightened the drills. We rehearsed the locks. We practiced the moments when a sound would make you believe you were alone and then required you to be patient instead. For every night that passed, we built more muscle memory. But the world has too many ways to grow thinner, and the town had too few awake people to hold the seam. The breach came on an evening that smelled of rain and cold pines.
It began like a dozen small nothings that in a different arrangement would have been forgettable. A rig with a dead engine, a dog barking somewhere past the trees, a woman turning her head wrong and asking us for a lighter. I remember the fluorescent clock reading 10:59 and the way the bulbs flickered as if the story were clearing its throat. At 11, we did the lock. I slid the deadbolt and locked the lean of the world for a little while. We checked the stock and did the count. The cameras caught nothing remarkable. The radio hummed. There was a lull. A lull is an arm's length of false safety. At 11:07, the bathroom light crawled out and died. At 11:09, the supply closet door groaned like an old man waking and then slammed. At 11:10, a section of ceiling tile in aisle 5 fell with a soft pat, revealing a darkness within the attic that didn't belong. The hum box in the back started to sing, a frequency I had not heard before, thin like metal being tuned by a wind not there. "All right," Thomas said, flat. He reached for the big box with 2 hands and set it on the counter like an altar.
We do the pattern. We hold the light. Ashley, you stay on the register and keep count. Sam, you'll take the lamp and the box and go to the back. Don't look longer than you have to. I thought then of my kids, teeth brushed, bodies curled in the small house, the locks we set at home for petty fears. I thought of the way a mother learns to trade sleep for guard time. I thought of 1,000 small rituals, the goodnight tuck, the lamp left in the hallway, the last check under the bed. Those were the things that kept the world safe enough to go on. We moved through the store like a small army, disciplined and quiet. Ashley kept the register light steady and counted each person we could account for. Driver in the cab, one man at pump 2, one at pump 4 who refused to come in and kept his engine idling like an animal. The ceiling creaked as if someone above had an itch to scratch, and the supply closet door banged again. The first breach was the bathroom. We heard the sucking sound before the door moved, a hollow pull like someone trying to inhale a room. The women's bathroom door bulged outward with a pressure that brought dust down in a small storm. We held the light and kept the humbox between us and the door. The thing at the door pressed as if trying to be human, and the glass on the stall window fogged like breath. Rule 3, I said, because you say the rule and it steadies your hands. Don't open it. Do not open it, Ashley echoed. We stayed on the line. The pressure against the door increased in a wave, and the sound changed to a sibilant chitter, which is worse than a scream because it's a language that was never meant to be heard. Then there was a sound like fabric tearing, and something that moved along the tile at the seam between the door and the floor, as if trying to slip through the crack that is always the emergency exit for hungry things. At the same time, the supply closet, where we kept the extra pallets and boxes, began to convulse with a series of impacts, as if someone had decided to forget the rules and batter their way in with their hands. The ceiling tile in aisle 5 tore away and something fell through, a length of dark, a drape of something that used to be sky. The lights in the coolers dimmed, and the fluorescent over the produce spun like tired eyes. We split the choreography. Thomas went for the main breaker to try an old trick that he claimed once slow to breach. I took the lamp and the humming box and moved toward the bathroom to keep light between the world and the glass. Ashley moved to block the register side and to keep an eye on the entrance. We held our positions like a map laid over a wound. The thing in the ceiling, if something's wrong and it starts in the attic, it can drop down as if gravity itself is an accomplice, made a noise like someone dialing a phone without pressing the buttons, a series of hungry clicks. One of the ceiling tiles skidded across the tile path and unveiled a shadow that extended a wrong sort of limb. We had to keep our eyes off the detail and focus on the pattern. Lamp up, humbox humming, count aloud. William appeared at the far glass like a column of night. He stood by the pumps and raised his arm in a way that was not quite a human signal. His presence tightened the air near the tree line. Something at the windows pressed its face and then recoiled, as if whatever comes from the trees recognizes him and hesitates. "William," Thomas said, "now." William didn't come in. He didn't break the lot surface to enter like some literal savior. He stood and he moved along the outer row of lights, and his hand gestured, and the things at the windows responded like fish under a net. He did what he always does. He rearranged the edge without stepping across it. The second breach was the supply closet. A thing pushed through the seam in the door and unfolded like a tide. It didn't come in the shape of a man. It came in the shape of a question. It left a slick trail on the floor that smelled of iron and old leaves. It slithered and made noises like the chorus of doors opening at once. It lunged toward the light. Thomas met it with his hand on the humming box, and the box threw out a sound like a bell. The thing recoiled and pulled back for a second, then pressed its face to the light and warped like oil on water. "Count," I said. 1, 2, 3, do the count. Ashley and I counted aloud in a slow rhythm. 11, latch, check stock. 11, latch, check stock. The words act like a spine to brace the night into a seam that resists tearing. The box thrummed, and something in the store answered with a noise that made the bulbs buzz. The thing pounded twice on the closet door, and then with a sound like fabric being pulled, it tore open the door. A limb, not a limb like ours, but a reaching, slatted appendage, slid through and brushed the lamp.
In the split second before the lamp went dim, I saw a hand that had no knuckle, only a strip of tough tissue that clung like a vine. It moved too fast to lock on to the eye's casual narrative. Instead, it made a bruise in the air, an after-image I carry like a coin in my pocket. Ashley screamed and dropped the register light. Thomas cursed and slammed the humming box down in a way that forced the thing to fold back. For an instant, it seemed we'd won. And then the ceiling gave again. The third breach came from above, a cascade of insulation and dark that filled the aisle like smoke. Something uncoiled from the roof in a long, slow descent and struck the rows of candy and paper towels. For a terrible second, I thought the stock had come alive. The paper warped and moved, then fell silent. We were slam blind in a shower of flakes and dust, and then a smell of wet earth flooded the store. We obeyed. We did not run to wrestle or to look. We kept the light as our geometry and the humbox between us and the openings. We moved as if we were following a prayer that had been taught to us in the dark. We recited the rules louder, not because the rules are words to ward off ghosts, but because they are a choreography that keeps human error out of the space. They keep you from becoming curious at the moment curiosity costs you your life. Things pushed at the glass and tested the panes like a child at a fence. One of the windows buckled inward, but didn't break. A wet smear ran down the outside and left a pattern like a handprint. A low singing noise came from where the trees met the lot. It sounded like a song that had been taught to animals. At one point, the humbox in my hand warmed, and I felt a sort of pressure in my chest like someone fingerprinting my ribcage. Thomas shouted, and the store rocked as if the foundation had been nudged. Ashley at the register began to cry without sound. Her cheeks were streaked with something that could have been fear or water or both. Someone, maybe the rig driver, drove his truck light in a sweep across the lot, and for a second the thing at the window receded like a tide going out. William moved along the tree line and raised his hand. He did not enter. He did not have to. He was enough of an outline of a man that the things from the trees paused, hesitant. I do not know why his shape has authority. It simply does. Then, from the corner by the register, something small and quick shot out and grabbed at Ashley's ankle. It was like a child's hand, but with too many joints. It clung and tried to take hold. She slammed the register down and fell back, and the thing scrabbled and left a smear on the tile. I kicked at it, but didn't look. The humbox screamed in a frequency that made the thing uncurl and drop like a broken toy. Thomas lunged and hammered the supply closet door shut with his shoulder, and it bowed inward but held.
For a second, we were a ring of people and devices and light, and the world tried to find a way through at each seam. In the middle of it all, there was a sound like a vehicle pulling up at full speed. Someone had called in a tip, or the rig driver had gone for help, or maybe the force of the noise had reached beyond our borders and something answered. A van pulled up, and a man in a hood, a uniform of a kind, jumped out with a flashlight and shouted commands that were practical and useless at once. They were men who had read about weird nights in books and wanted to be heroes. They were the sort who don't stay long. William moved then. He stepped away from the tree line and toward the pumps, and the light clung to him like a second coat. He did not come into the store. He raised the hood of whatever garment he wore, and for the first time I could see that he had a cracked scar at the base of his neck like a door that had been forced. He stepped outward, and the thing at the glass pressed its face and then withdrew, folding in on itself. William turned his head, and for the first time he looked directly at the window where we stood, and he blessed us in a way I can't name. It was a gesture of passing attention. A man takes account. There was damage. The ceiling tiles were wet and torn. The supply closet door would not close right for weeks. Some of our inventory was chewed and ruined in ways I refused to name. Ashley went home with her hands trembling and would not eat for days. The rig driver never came in again. The van's man claimed they'd seen nothing but the trees, and the cameras gave us a record of a night made of smears and static, and a frame where a tall man stood at pump 3 with a coat that drank the light. In the aftermath, we did the work of cleaning and taking stock and calling in insurance that would do the math and score the losses. Detective Bennett came back with a sharper face and asked for the footage. He sat in front of the monitors and replayed frames slowly, like you might peel layers off an onion to see if the core is an explanation. He didn't come away satisfied. The district attorney asked us to be careful in our statements. The town had conversation for a week and then forgot. Normal things resumed in the daytime world. The mail was delivered, the coffee shops set out fresh croissants, kids went to school. But nights are an entirely different economy. After that night, Thomas sat me down and slid the folder across the table and said, "You have to read this now." He didn't threaten. He only said a thing with the gravity of someone making sure you are aware. The folder had maps and notes in a scrawl that had been tightened into a code. It described the site as a pressure node, thin spot, and the rules as a protocol of containment. The diagrams were vague and elliptical, more like memory sketches than blueprints.
He talked about anchors and nodes and halo effects and then stopped, as if the words spat out there were too easy to transform into an instruction manual. "This is not something to use as a how-to," he said. "It is a record of the why. We are not inviting curiosity. We are mapping the limits." "What if we can't hold it?" I asked. It was the question that pulsed like an exposed wire. "Then the seam widens," he said. "You don't want to know who it calls in the town. The rules bide us time. They are not absolute.
but they're better than nothing. "Who is William?" I asked, because after Mark and the ceiling in the attic, the world asks you for names. "He answers when the things notice him," Thomas said. "Maybe he was born with the knowledge. Maybe he learned it the hard way. Maybe he's not a man at all. The only important thing is that he shows at the border, and he does not demand payment in the way you expect. He takes his toll in other currencies. Sometimes I think he brings back what we lose." He said it like a man guessing at a dream. It made me think of thresholds and inheritance. There is always someone who keeps the map, because to let it go is to let the seam unfurl. I've been on the night shift long enough to know the job isn't shy about recruiting people who are tired and practical. It is always looking for someone whose hands know how to do small, fixed tasks in a crisis. It wanted me to keep going. Ashley came back after a week, steadier now, as if practice had cured the first shocks. She had a haircut that made her look younger, and a bandage on her ankle where the thing had grabbed and left the mark. She didn't talk much about it. She just returned to the counter and to the rules, and she learned to place herself on the good side of them. She became the kind of trainee who didn't ask for the folder, but learned the rhythms anyway. The next month saw a lull. The trees kept their black line, and people forgot we were on the edge of a thin place. The store did a steady trade with truckers and local night shift nurses. I went home each day and took the afternoon shift of life seriously. Medicine for a child, homework, soccer practice, and then returned to the lot at dusk like a soldier walking back toward the trench. The job had embedded itself into my spine. I woke with the list of counts on my tongue. And then winter came with an appetite. The pines dropped a hard snow, and the lot's sodium lamps turned each flake into a small sun. Ice made the asphalt bright and dangerous, and the trees held a darker shadow in their hollows. On a night when the moon was a shy coin, the full-scale breach happened. It began with a call that came in at 10:32 from a trucker who said his headlights had been flashing like a Morse code at nothing, and that a figure had run across his path and vanished into the trees. We recorded the call, and I tried to reassure the man. At 11, we did the lock. The clock read 11 exactly, because we were not taking chances.
We had a plan, and we had practiced. At 11:12, the bathroom light died again. At 11:15, the supply closet door thudded, and the ceiling tile in aisle 3 dropped like an amulet. At 11:18, a quick, small figure ran past the front glass on the outside and knocked twice. It wasn't a person in the human sense. It was a thing wearing the impression of a person, and the impression wasn't accurate. We executed the choreography down to the syllable. Ashley held the register and read the roll list aloud. Thomas stood at the back with a box where he kept the older device, the one that hummed in a way that made raw nerves tighten. He had a radio attached to his belt, and he had, for once, a handful of people ready to help. Drivers who had come in with stories, and a man from the sanitation crew who didn't ask questions about the reason he was staying. William was not visible at first. The breach happened in 3 places at once. The bathroom door opened, and something that smelled like old leaves and river rot stepped out and sank its shape into the light. The supply closet peeled back, and a ribbed thing emerged and wrapped itself in the shelves like ivy. And the ceiling tiles burst, and something dropped down that shook the air and the hanging fluorescence like bell clappers. We did not have a choreography for that many simultaneous breaches. We had practiced for 2, maybe 3. Alice put it into numbers, and Thomas recalibrated. But the night is inventive, and it spreads pressure like spilled ink. I moved with the lamp and the humbox, and kept the line between the thing and our faces. Ashley kept counting the list. Thomas tried to wedge the supply closet door shut, and the thing inside responded by uncoiling a limb and slapping at him. He staggered, and the humbox slipped and sang a raw note. I grabbed his shoulder and held the box level. "Keep the light," I told Ashley. "Rule 5, she said. "Don't look into the lot." We obeyed the rules like they were lifelines. The things at the windows pushed and tried to shape themselves into human gestures. Their faces were wrong in ways that hurt the eye, mouths where there should be ears, or eyes too flat. They pressed and smeared and left marks on the glass like fingerprints rubbed from a cold person. The humbox responded with a bell that made the air feel thicker. The lamp made the tile look like a river. William came then, sudden and silent, and he crossed the parking lot in 3 long strides and stood at the far edge of the pump lights. He did not come through our door. He did not need to. He raised his hand, and something shifted in the air like a curtain being adjusted. The things on the glass cried out and drew back, but the ones in the ceiling tightened and screamed in a pitch we only heard as the hair along our arms rising. Thomas forced the supply closet door shut and pinned his shoulder until his ribs hit the metal with a sound like an animal dying.
He slammed the box down, and for a second I feared it had failed. Then the box flared with a light that made the thing clutch its face and arch backward. I heard a noise like something hitting metal, and then I thought I smelled burning leaves. "Now," Thomas said, and it was a word of a captain, not of a man. We did the count again, but this time the world wanted to undo the numbers. The ceiling convulsed and a spray of dust rained down. The thing in the bathroom tried an old trick. It mimicked voices. It said a phrase that sounded exactly like my name, but huskier and older. And for a second I wanted to answer. That is the moment the night looks for. The second you hear a voice you love and are tempted to chase it. The rules forbid that. We keep the light between us and the illusion. "Don't answer," I told myself as much as I told the thing. "Do not give it the courtesy of a human reaction." Ashley gripped the register and kept reading. "Driver in pump 4, count sheet 1, 2, 3. She hit the number and a car alarm in the lot shrieked as if to punctuate our rhythm. William shifted his weight, and the thing at the window flattened like a shadow pressed under a thumb. For a moment it looked like our side was winning. And then the ceiling fell in a soft wave, and one of the things loosed itself from the hatch and landed between the candy and the cereal like a child's puppet that had been dyed wrong. It looked at us and then at Ashley, and chose her. It was swift and small and hungry. I saw it touch her hand, and it made a sound that wasn't a bite, but something like teeth being counted. She didn't scream. She made a sound like a cough that had been rehearsed, like a person trying to call for help with a hand over their mouth. I lunged. Instinct knows its own path. I grabbed the creature and slammed the humbox at it, and the box screamed and the thing uncoiled from Ashley's wrist and recoiled back to the ceiling as if shocked. It left marks on her skin that would later be described as scars in a police report, but in the moment they were only heat and then cold. She slumped, and I grabbed her shoulder and tried to keep her breath even. "Get her out," Thomas said. "Get her to the van. Move the list." I did. I put Ashley into the van that a driver had left running and told him to take her home and to keep the lights on until the sun rose. His hands shook. He drove away with his hazard lights flashing. For a second we felt like a team that had been patched and thrown back into the fire. There was more. The humbox in my hand began to sing with a voice that felt like memory. The thing at the window pushed like a blind man, and the glass thudded. It found a seam and rubbed its face, and the texture of the glass gave like a membrane, and for a heartbeat it found purchase. My heart hammered because the rules say you cannot let a seam form. William moved then in a way that made the mosquitoes of the tree line tremble. He did not come into the store. Instead, he walked along the perimeter, and his coat scraped the snow like someone dragging a net. He lifted both arms and shouted a sound that was not a human word. It echoed into the trees like an oar striking a hull. The things paused, and then, with a wet, snapping noise, they retreated into the wood along the pines, as if someone had told them they'd eaten enough for one night. Thomas slumped to the floor with the humbox exhaling at a low frequency. He had a smear on his sleeve where something had grazed him, and his hands were shaking from the strain. The store was wrecked, aisles scattered, a smell of earth and damp goods and burnt ozone. The rigs were idling, and a trucker sat with his face buried in his hands. The van with Ashley had roared away. William stood at the pump line, and for a long breath he looked like a shadow cut from human cloth, and then he turned and moved back into the trees and was swallowed whole. We did the cleanup that night in a shell-shocked, numb way. Detective Bennett came with a clipboard, and the town's late watchman served coffee in cups that trembled. We made statements and took photographs. I signed forms I didn't fully read. The sun came up with a lopsided tenderness, painting the pines in buttery light that seemed for a moment to erase the night before. The lot looked like a place that had been held up and ransacked, then politely apologized to and left with its dignity in tatters. Thomas collapsed into a chair, and his face had the hollow look of a man who'd pushed his limits. "We held," he said, "but barely. The seam wanted more. It will come back." "What are we supposed to do?" I asked. The question felt simple and enormous at once. "We keep doing what we do," he said. "We teach the rules. We don't give curiosities the dignity of attention. We patch the breaks. We make sure the line doesn't look like a need." The aftermath lasted weeks. The insurance company paid for part of the damage. Ashley recovered in fits and starts. She came back to work a month later with a scar on her wrist and a new quiet in her face. Thomas took his time patching the store. He installed new lights and more cameras, though the cameras didn't always catch what they were supposed to. Detective Bennett left with something like understanding and a request that we keep him informed if anything else happened. The town talked about that weird night for a cup or two, and then the thing was folded into the category of the inexplicable. Life resumed its thin lines of daily tasks. Emma had ballet, and Jacob learned to tie his shoes. I drove the same route to the lot and watched the trees like a sentinel monitors a border. There are people who pretend a war is ended because the fighting has moved. They go to the farmer's market, they laugh at small tragedies, they buy groceries. People like us learn to keep a double ledger, one list of ordinary life and one list of the night. I was heavier at the seams for a long time. There was a night, months later,
when William came into the store. He pushed open the front door like a man tired of waiting. He bought a coffee and left the bill on the counter like any other patron. He didn't ask for thanks, and he didn't smile. He stood a little while and watched the tree line, and then left without looking at me. He did not come in again for weeks. When he did, he was lighter at the shoulders, as if he'd laid something down. Sometimes he takes things, Thomas said. Not people the way you think. Items, I suppose, that slip the seam. He'll bring back a few. He hides others. We don't have the ledger for it. He acts like a man who trades in odd currencies. Does he pay a price? I asked. Thomas shrugged. All guardians do. We don't need to understand how. We just need to know he's on the other side when we need him. And when he's not, we are the ones that hold the line. The job had changed me. The rules had become more than a list hung in my apron. They were the liturgy of a life where sleepy children and a cold cup of coffee are the prizes at the end of a day. I found myself repeating them in the grocery store as my hand reached for a can. Never alone. Lock at 11. Don't open the bathroom door. The rules are good at making you into an instrument. They file you down until you can perform without thinking. People ask me if I was done. Friends pressed with well-meaning concern. You could quit, they said. There are other jobs. My answer was simple and maternal, shrunk to the bone. Who watches the lot if I don't? I had my reasons beyond pay. The pay we took was not only wages, it was a kind of responsibility. Emma and Jacob slept easier, knowing I kept strange hours. There is a peace in being the person the night consults, as if the world were full of moving parts that must be tended. On a quiet evening after the main repairs, I walked to my car under the sodium lamps and paused to look at the trees. They stood as they always do, patient, dark, indifferent. The lot lay between us like a thin skin. The world beyond remained an unreadable thing. I thought of Mark when I saw a pair of sneakers tangled in undergrowth and wondered about the way his laugh had once held a challenge in it. I thought of Ashley and how she now carries the rules in a way that steadies her. I thought of Thomas hunched over his folder, and of Detective Bennett who would knock and ask if anything else had changed in the night. And I thought of William, who keeps his own counsel at the pumps and moves like an answer without a question. The first time I had given the rules to a new hire, I had done it like someone teaching swimming. It was a conversation that no one else on the payroll had thought to have. The rules are not cruel. They are not meant to be feared as a God's law. They are a protocol, humble, brutal, saving. Belief alone will not save you. Obedience, repetition, and discipline do. If you think this is about faith, you're missing it.
It's about attention. It's about the way a small, steady ritual will hold back a world that has teeth. Sometimes people ask me if the woods are getting worse. I cannot tell them with the authority they want. I can only report tendencies. Nights when the trees lean closer, when the pines make that old scraping sound, when the hummock stutters. I can tell you about the stitches we've had to put in the seams. The woods change. The lot changes. People change when they stand between the two. At home that night, I kissed Heba's forehead and told Jacob a story about a trucker who taught me how to whistle like wind. I made mac and cheese like any ordinary mother and folded laundry, because you fight monsters by keeping the small, domestic order. I tucked the laminated card into my apron pocket and slid my hand over the names of the rules as if they were prayer beads. A month after the big breach, I found another note in the folder Thomas kept. It was a single sentence in his tight script. The job changes people in small ways. You will either leave as you came, or you will stay and become someone whose hands know secrets. I folded the page and tucked it into the register like a charm. There are nights when I still go to the lot and stand at the window and watch the trees. Sometimes nothing happens, and the quiet is a benediction. Sometimes a figure will pass, and William will block the edge, and the night will back away. There are people, mothers like me, who sleep with the corner lamp on, and who wouldn't have it any other way. We clean the store, stock the aisles, and keep the count. We tell ourselves that counts are only about inventory, and in one sense they are. But they are also a ritual of attention, a way to remind the world that we are watching. The rules are the small things that add up into a life that stands opposing an indifferent dark. I have not stopped thinking about Mark. He is a ledger line, a warning, a regret, a reason. When I clock out on any given morning, I cross the lot and look at the trees. They do not look back like people do. They are patient, and they keep their own nights. The job remains the front line of the thin place, and I am still the one who keeps one eye on the register and another on the tree line. I still work the night shift at a remote truck stop. The woods are still a dark necklace beyond the lot. There are rules about the woods. They are not superstition.
They are what keep children sleeping in their beds and what keep the town from waking up to something worse. If you ever find yourself under the sodium lights with the trees pressing in, remember this. Don't be clever. Don't be late. Keep the lamp up between you and the dark. The rules are not elegant. They're survival. If you want to come back for another night, to hear more of what the trees whisper and what the pumps know, subscribe. There will be other nights, and the woods don't rest.